Hello, everybody, and welcome to the fourth instalment of Cause for Thought Shorts, short problem solving stories from the coalface, normally hosted by George. This week, George is the guest. So I'm Jonathan Batchelor, CEO of What Caused This. We're the home of the Cause for Thought podcast. And today we've got George, our head of professional and financial services, bringing us a story to astound. Is that right, George?
Yeah, setting me up for disappointing people there, but thank you for having me again, John.
That's the only reason I'm here, George.
That's it. Okay, so second story that I'm going to share with everyone. And again, it's a financial services story. So for those that aren't aware, I used to play a number of different risk management roles within major investment banks, and this is an example of a story from my past that hopefully helps to explain a problem that we had to provide a root cause and a solution for, but also to introduce some concepts to help break down some human psychology as well in problem solving. So this one is about access rights and toxic entitlements. And these are probably fairly common in every kind of industry, but what we're really talking about here is in a banking context, you never want someone to have the ability to, for instance, book a trade and settle a trade at the same time, because they have potentially the ability to perform some nefarious activity and mask some stuff that they might be doing if they want to do something in an unauthorized kind of malicious way. So this story is about a bank that I worked with, and they believed that they had a robust entitlement management framework in place. So what we mean by that is they had role-based access, they had quarterly certifications that were done, and they had segregation of duties, controls that were embedded into their workflows. So for anyone who's worked in and around technology risk and information security, that's a pretty decent starting place. However, during an internal audit, it was uncovered that a long-standing employee had accumulated a toxic mix of permissions across front, middle, and back office systems and applications. The reason for that was actually that this individual had been around the organization a long time, and they'd benefited from moving internally from role to role to role, and they'd moved up through their career and they had their access.
So it's just like dragged through, in effect, George. When you talk about this toxic mix, it's like they're dragged as they move through the organisation. They just got associated certain permissions, gained permissions, and some of them weren't changed or removed as they moved up and through.
That's right. And I'll come to the reason in a second, but it's probably first important to say that in this case, no malicious activity had occurred, but the combination that they possessed meant, in theory, they could, to go back to what I was saying before, John, they could initiate a trade, manipulate its risk profile, and approve its settlement. And I'm oversimplifying that, but they had the ability to do some fairly malicious activity if they wanted to. And history would show us that this kind of risk is not just theoretical. So this is kind of a bit of inception here, a story within a story. So back in 2008, a guy called Jerome Curviel, who worked for SocGen, accumulated a toxic combination of front, middle, and back office permissions, allowing him to create fictitious trades and positions, to bypass controls that were put in place to try and pick up on these things, and to hide unauthorized trades that he had on the books. The total financial loss that SocGen had to kind of swallow was a mere £3.7 billion. Yes, 3.7 billion. And on top of that, compounding it, there were obviously severe reputational and regulatory issues that this caused too.
Yeah, just a minor 4 billion blip.
Yeah, quite. And then, a mere 1.7 billion was lost by UBS in 2011. So 3 years later, a guy called Kwaku Adebole. It wasn't the same fact pattern, but he did possess toxic entitlement combinations and weak controls between systems, and he used that to book internal trades that masked essentially the checks that were there to pick up on unauthorized trading. Again, that was less, not much less, but 1.7 billion. And again, it came with material issues around reputation and standing with clients, customers, and regulators as well. So that's really just a sobering thought to help kind of set the context for why this issue that we and audit had come across was so important to investigate.
And I guess the scale of the issue is never to do with the causes, is it? Because if these things exist, you can't control the ceiling that they'll be used for, intentionally or unintentionally.
That's right. And from an audit and a risk perspective, when one person has access and permissions across multiple what we call control layers, the organization can potentially be blindsided to unauthorized and malicious activity. So to the example at hand, the only reason that the toxic entitlements were discovered was actually thanks to a thematic audit that was done specifically due to the SocGen and UBS incidents occurring, right? So that this was put in place very much to pick up on these things. And you could say, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on where you were sat, it did pick up on such a scenario.
You can imagine that meeting, can't you, George? Someone just sits around there and goes, could this happen here?
Quite. So in this case, thankfully, it was a near miss, right? But I was asked to facilitate, in my role as the head of risk, I was asked to facilitate the incident investigation to really get to the bottom of how this had happened and then what we could do moving forward. And if I think about the kinds of things that were brought up, it was, people were saying things like, well, the entitlement workflow must not be working correctly, must be misfiring, or, recertification, the process that happened once a quarter, must have just missed this user, or maybe we need to implement a new identity governance tool. And the access management team, so the group that was there specifically to look after, system entitlements and the processes around that, pushed back quite hard. And they said that their model was sound, right? And that they found that issues only arose when the process wasn't followed. So something to me, John, felt off.
Well, right? Because people always follow the process exactly as it's written, don't they, George?
Well, so during one workshop, it's funny you say that, John, during one workshop, I'm the kind of person that likes to check and challenge my own understanding of something. So I asked what felt like quite a simple question. So I asked the team that was working on this with me, so to confirm, it was in the review data that was extracted that this one individual had front, middle, and back office accesses. Have I understood that correctly? And everyone said yes, everyone nodded. So my follow-up question was, okay, so we all knew about this. Why wasn't it challenged? And after a pause, someone admitted, well, this guy's been here forever. He knows everyone. People assume that if he has access, he must need it. And he even said so himself.
Oh, there we are then. So straight to the person that wanted to commit the crime. They created the crime, and everyone went, well, been here a long time.
That's okay, because he said so. And in this case, the individual who had these accesses, as far as I'm aware, had no intention of doing anything malicious. I think they were just incredibly busy. They probably saw the fact that someone in an ops entitlement management team following up with them was a bit of a nuisance. And they just said, look, I need these accesses, go away. But it wasn't a procedural miss. What this was a cultural and behavioural blind spot. And this was powered by something that we called authority bias. So things like his tenure, his reputation, his perceived expertise, and the fact that he was busy created this, I guess, atmosphere or dynamic where no one felt comfortable questioning his entitlements and whether they made sense and really getting to the crux of why he had them. So
Yeah, and we've all seen it, haven't we, on films and TV, and maybe even in our own workplaces, where the most senior person approaches someone that is more junior than them and says, "I haven't got time for this. Just
absolutely,
sort it for me now. Make it happen." And those sort of conversations and those sort of personal pressures often circumnavigate a formal procedure that's in place because of everything else that's around that environment, the culture, their personal pressures. But you can imagine it happening, can't you?
you
And
can.
not for any, as you say, malicious reason.
That's right. And thankfully, John, in this case, the issue was caught early. No harm was done. And once the remedial steps were taken, so they removed, a process was a proper process was put in place to remove legacy access attached to old roles, and it was almost made like there was a scorched earth process, we used to call it, where
I
you
bet,
moved
yeah.
role, everything was killed, even if it was a bit of an inconvenience, and you had to
Yeah,
reapply
just
for the
build back up
access
from the zero.
because you quickly find what you actually need.
Yeah.
We put in place cross-domain segregation of duties checks, and one thing that actually was almost the human element, we put in place a process where if there was a so-called high-risk profile, so someone had moved internally that you really want to have scrutiny over their accesses, there had to be an independent review. So it couldn't be someone who potentially felt that they shouldn't be doing something or that they were going to be told off for asking someone in a senior position. It was made independent. And
Yeah,
actually
it
what we
was really
found,
important, isn't it? Because it isn't something someone's doing in addition to their job,
that's
and
right.
people feel like they're being bothered by them. It is their job, and they do it to everybody.
That's
So
right.
it's fair. But also, I can imagine from how my sort of stuff is structured that that scorched earth thing to me sounds amazing, because I'd probably find 30% of the things where I go, look, I don't need that anymore, or I don't use it,
Yeah,
or that isn't sort of important for my role. And with the cost of subscriptions in organisations now as well, imagine that. How many
absolutely.
dormant licenses are out there that are being paid for unnecessarily.
Yeah. And look
Just
what
picking
we've,
up on a point you
sorry, go
said,
on. Yeah.
yeah, the authority bias. I mean,
Mm,
that's clearly present in financial and professional services, but it's present everywhere, isn't it? In any
yep.
organisation that has any tier of people, or has been established for enough time for someone to have been there longer than others. How can you overcome that, really, in an organisation, or what is the best way to overcome that, do you think?
So authority bias is something, it's a human kind of characteristic. And I think for us to try and overcome it, I would suggest three things. Right, and I apply these specifically to kind of problem solving, but actually, to your point, John, this could actually be something that exists outside of when problems happen. So, the first thing I would always suggest is to try and separate hierarchy from evidence. So, what do we mean by that? So, reframing the discussions we're having so that every insight, every assumption, every process is tested and questioned in the same way, regardless of who said it. And you can use really neutral questions to get to this point, like what data supports this, or what assumptions are we relying on? And that really starts to shift the focus away from status to substance. So really trying to get to the crux of something rather than looking at the individual that it relates to.
And that can almost link back to something you said on a previous podcast, George, with regards to the sort of assumption audit.
Absolutely.
The neutralized data driven way of finding out where we are and why we are in that place, as opposed to the human led one.
Yeah, exactly. And then thinking about that more, it actually ties in quite nicely into the second point, which is to use or try to use structured challenge formats. So I find, and I've seen it happen before, including in this example, that authority bias is able to exist and it can flourish in a dynamic where things are very open and unstructured, and where louder and more senior voices are able to dominate conversations, are able to apply undue authority and influence over conversations. So, including mechanisms such as round robin contributions and conversations. So, if you're in a meeting, you're trying to investigate a problem, not letting the most senior or the loudest voice talk for 90% of the meeting, right? So moving round the people individually, whether that's in a meeting room or over, video conference, going round people and trying to solicit views from everyone, and actually trying to prevent language from coming up like "I disagree with you" or "but," and it's using build language like "and" to try and build on what people are saying rather than knock them down by
And I
using
think declaring
perceived
that at the start of
authority.
the meeting, because in these situations, we often sit there, we're desperate to say our thing, we're trying to find our time to
That's
jump
right.
in. But if we know we're going to get a turn and we know at what point we get our turn, we can make notes to go back on what people said. Or often, and I've been in these obviously plenty of times in our root cause
Mm,
analysis world, when somebody says something, you feel this visceral need to object or contest what they've said. There's 3 or 4 people in between you and them, and by the time it gets to you, someone else has done that anyway, or 2 or 3 people have done
yeah,
that anyway, and you're starting to bring the data above the opinion at that point. And I think it's a real useful process.
I agree. And a nice way to bring quieter individuals into the conversation or to prevent them from falling into blind spots is, if there are questions, to try and direct them towards individuals, not so they feel threatened or like they're being attacked, but actually so that they feel that their opinion is being invited into a conversation or a part of the conversation. And then something that is a little bit different is, for anyone who follows sport. So I'm thinking maybe tennis or cricket. The captains have a certain number of challenges that they are allowed when they use like the video assistant referee
Very
system.
topical with the Ashes on the go at the minute, George.
Absolutely. And you can introduce a certain number of challenges per person rule. So going into a meeting, I'm making the number up here, each person might have one challenge, and that prevents, let's just say, someone who might be in a senior position, a position of authority, treading down on people's opinions because they have one challenge during the meeting. And I find that that can redistribute influence and prevents that kind of almost deference becoming the outcome, because people just are almost afraid or they don't want to speak to someone who's in power. It's empowering that ability to kind of speak up.
I'm only smiling, George, because knowing my personality as I do, I would probably get to the end of a meeting where I haven't used my challenge and then just try and find a way to use my challenge.
Just use it. Yeah.
I don't want to leave the room with it in my pocket.
So let me reframe the challenge. It should be no more than, rather than you must use it. Maybe I should put it that way.
That would probably be better for someone like me, George.
And then the third kind of spoke of the wheel, if we're trying to tackle this, and it comes from speaking up, is, we talk a lot around psychological safety, right? And around encouraging people to speak up and have a voice and be heard. That is so fundamental to a risk culture, right? And people only challenge authority or more senior people when they feel safe doing so. So I would encourage all leaders, anyone who's hosting a problem-solving conversation, to build a culture where that safe challenge of senior people is routine. It's not viewed as being kind of, I'm doing something naughty, or I should not, I should put a lid on my voice. I should be recognized and maybe even rewarded for challenging and not just being compliant, right? And then the other side of that, if you want people to do it more and more and for it to be seen as a positive business enablement behavior, when someone makes a good catch or they make a good suggestion, call it out publicly, whether that be in the meeting or afterwards, and you can bet people will, moving forward, not be so intimidated by authority or feel that unable or unease with that authority bias.
I think you've got to positively respond to their first ever challenge, haven't you? I think it's habit creation there. Thanks ever so much, George, for bringing that up. I didn't know that before today. And in a problem solving world, we may go, look, I don't know if that is true or it isn't true, but we'll certainly try and find out.
Yeah.
From this point. And
that's right.
You only have to do that once. And not only does that person feel the confidence to speak up in the next one, but other people that are around that table that were waiting for the first person to do it have now seen it happen in a positive light. And they will know things that people don't. The people at the top of organizations have such a filtered view of the world, because every single layer that information goes up through, it becomes less because people are incentivized to get people, that the TLDR culture we've got here, and you lose so much. And just building on that point you said there, when we run problem solving, when we put teams together for problem solving, the greatest teams you'll see would be the most senior person in an organization and the most junior person in the organization, crossed with the person that served for the longest and served for the least amount of time. And the questions you get in that room will be golden, because they don't have the assumptions. They haven't got any historic biases of how it happens. People aren't necessarily scared of the boss because they've only just joined, or they don't know they're scary, or they would assume that maybe they're nice. And that open culture of conversation, as opposed to fear of getting something wrong, there's so much power in that.
That's right.
George, I've got so many things I want to pick up on, but I think we're going to save that for a next short episode. But one thing is clear, that biases exist in all of us, don't they?
Absolutely.
As humans, and biases are actually inherent in most organizations, because most organizations are made up of humans. So I've certainly got a lot of cause or pause for thought at the end of this one.
I see what you did there.
Yeah, it's subtle, isn't it? But I'm really grateful for you spending the time with us today, George. I'm really grateful for you moving out of host to guest seat. And
Pleasure, thank you.
I'm very much looking forward to hosting the next one and learning more. So that's been me, Jonathan Batchelor, with a lovely short story from George Holman. Thanks, George.
Thanks, John. Thanks all.